Okay, let's call the Planning Commission meeting for October 19, 2017 to order. Pledge of Allegiance, since Vice Chair Joe Padilla is not here. Dan, would you like to lead us in the spot?
Sure.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's do roll call.
Commissioner Hamel? Here. Commissioner Heedy?
Here.
Commissioner Sarkia?
Here.
Vice Chair Padilla is absent. Chair Dunstan?
Present. Here. Okay, any reordering of the agenda?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Any presentations? Looks like none. Okay, we're looking for the approval of the minutes from the regular Planning Commission meeting on September 21st, 2017.
Mr. Chair, I move that the minutes be accepted as written.
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
That's right. All right, any public comments? Okay. Consent calendar, none. Any continued public hearings? Looks like none. New public hearings? None. So let's move on to other business. Item number 2, preliminary review of the 518 Avenue of Flags mixed-use development, 17-FTP03. Irma.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman Dunstan and members of the Planning Commission. Tonight is the preliminary review of the 518 Avenue Flags project. It's a final development plan application. The Planning Commission had previously reviewed this as a concept review back in August, and the applicant has now submitted a formal application and filed all the fees, so we are reviewing it as the final development plan application. The project is located at the northeast corner of Avenue Flags and 2nd Street. And because this is a little bit of an older aerial map that we have, I also pulled up a newer aerial off of Google, which shows that there have since been built the Avenue Highlands apartment buildings right along here, which back up to the project site right here. And the project site has also been cleared. The site has been cleared of any prior structures that were existing on it. So we have, the residential uses to the east. There's a motel to the north, the Avenue Flags median to the west, and then there's also what is currently a multifamily residential building right here. However, this is also slated to be potentially redeveloped as part of the Avenue Flag specific plan as a corner, prominent corner location. The project site is about 1.25 acres. As I mentioned, is currently vacant. The land use currently is CR, which is general commercial, both zoning and land use, and this is the underlying land use, zoning designation that will be there. The Avenue Flags is currently under adoption by the City Council. The first reading of the ordinance was held last week, and next week on the 26th they are scheduled to do the second reading of the ordinance, so it's in process. This project is located on a very highly visible and prominent street corner in the Avenue Flags. It's one of the corners, well, all the 4 corners are, but this is the first development that's coming in on a prominent corner at that location. It's an anchor site for the downtown's core and the town plaza. And it's located on a portion of Opportunity Site number 7 that was identified in the Avenue Flag specific plan. And again, this is identified for a signature corner courtyard building. The height limit currently under the CR zoning is 35 feet, and after the specific plan is formally approved, that height will still be 35 feet max, with potential up to 50 feet with the DOR incentive program. And setbacks and massing will also apply to the site per the form-based code that's part of the Avenue Flex specific plan. This site is also in the 100-year flood zone, and compliance with the floodplain ordinance will be required. The owner of the property is Cameron and Company. Well, it's the gentleman's last name is Cameron. Cameron and Company. They will be one of the tenants. They will be the anchor tenant on the property. They are a food service and laundry equipment consultant and contractor. The future tenants on the site at this point are unknown, as the building is being built on a spec basis. The applicant for the development permit is Archeon Architects, and we have here in the audience tonight representative of Archeon Architects, Ruben Barola, as well as the contractor on the project, Larry Rodart. But this is proposed as a mixed-use commercial project that is ultimately planned to be developed in 2 phases. We're currently reviewing phase 1 of that development. And as I mentioned before, the plans will need to conform to the Avenue Flex specific plan area, the specific plan regulations at the time that the application for this development permit is deemed complete. Those compliances will include the design style, any form-based code requirements, and the courtyard requirement, as well as parking. So phase 1 of this project is the only thing that is being reviewed right now. It consists of a 21,820 square foot commercial and storage space. There's 2 buildings on the property. Building 1 fronts on the Avenue of Flags, and it's a 2-story building. The ground floor has retail space of about 8,870 square feet, and the second floor is office space. Building number 2 is a storage / showroom building at the rear of building number 1, and it is visible from 2nd Street and the residential uses to the rear. Parking is being provided on site for the commercial uses and the commercial and storage uses. 62 spaces total are being provided. This includes 3 handicap units and 1 loading zone. Bike racks are also shown on the plan with the number of spaces not specified. Driveway access is in 3 locations along 2nd Street, and a landscape area of approximately 5% of the site is being shown. Phase 2 will be subject to a separate permit application in the future, and this would be for, at this point, the applicant has indicated that it would be for 8 apartment units on the rear portion of the site. And in a moment I will show you the site plan. The parking that is being provided for phase 1 takes up the parking area, so at the time that the permit application comes in for the 8 apartment units, they would need to look at different options for supplying parking for those uses. So here is the site plan. This is building number 1 that is fronting on Avenue of Flags right here. This is building number 2, which is the warehouse and storage building to the rear. The parking area is here and here, as well as tucked back into the corner. And this area right here is the land area that's designated for the future phase 2 development. So as you can see, they have maximized all space available here in order to provide parking for the phase 1 proposed development. This is the landscape plan, the preliminary landscape plan that was submitted, and some landscaping is shown along the street frontages. some landscaping along the buildings, some landscaping along the parking row. One of the items that we have discussed in our meetings with the applicant is that this row of parking here would be developed on an interim basis and not totally landscaped out in the interim, because when in the future the phase 2 project, which is here, would get developed, they would need to reconfigure a portion of this parking lot, so they didn't want to put in too permanent of landscaping and then have to and other elements for the parking, and then have to tear it out at the time the phase 2 comes in. Grading plans were submitted, and actually a grading plan slash street improvement plan was submitted all on one sheet. They are showing a retention pond buried underneath the parking lot at this location, and other grading amenities. And as I mentioned before, the parking lot here would be graded out in a more permanent configuration, and this one could be changed, and so they're not showing as extensive of landscaping and rather grading in that area. Elevations, dimensioned elevations were submitted. They were submitted for only 3 sides of the buildings, where we are missing the north side elevations. So that is something that has shown up in staff's comments. But another item that I would just like to point out to you, because this will come up in the comments as well, is the elevations show a 3-foot rise of the finished floor elevation for the building above street level, with ramps and stairs going up in order to access the corner courtyard, as well as the entrances to the store frontages here. And this is something that's not shown on their colored elevations, which is also as part of our comments, but I did want to point this out to the Commission, as it is also further addressed as a requirement in order to comply with the Avenue Flag specific plan, in order to provide pedestrian-friendly circulation at the street level along Avenue Flags.
Yes. On the height of the building, the 35 feet, does that include the utility well and top?
The elevation is shown up to the top. Oops, sorry. The maximum elevation is shown up to this point.
So that is 35 feet.
And that is 35 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Some signage is shown. It will need to be further fleshed out, as I will indicate in the comments to come. But one of the things that we notice is that there is a sign here for 2nd Street Cafe, and the cafe restaurant use was not something that was written up in the project description, nor was it counted in the parking calculations, which the restaurant use has a slightly different parking calculation. Because the building is being built on spec, they are not certain what users are coming in at this point, so they couldn't really provide that level of detail. If in fact a restaurant use were to be considered at a later date for this, they would have to provide us with a mechanism for addressing the parking requirements for that. And let me see what else we have going. So this is the elevation on from 2nd Street. This is the building number 2, which is the storage warehouse unit in back. And these are the rear entrances to the office, and also the rear entrances to the retail space that looks to the front. These are the color elevations. And again, one of the things that we notice is that these elevations do not really reflect the rise in the finished floor elevation that was shown on the preceding plan, so there's an inconsistency, and it's also only showing 3 sides, and we do require all 4 sides of the building, and particularly because the northern frontage, rather elevation, is visible from the neighboring property, and they have indicated certain finishes for firewall purposes, so we really do need to see what that elevation will look like. And this is a perspective from an angled view of the property. Again, this does not show the elevation difference, nor the ramps or the stairs either, so we'll need further clarification on that. So staff comments, I would just like to say that per comments that we've heard from City Council and the Planning Commission, any of the developments coming into the Avenue Flag specific plan area will be held to a high standard of design, materials, and quality development. Our comments, I'll highlight the main ones. We will detail these further in the incomplete letter, but I will highlight the main ones for the Commission. On the site plan, and I've mentioned a few times about the building number 1 being raised above the grade, the street level grade. And our comment on this, and this was picked up by our architect that was reviewing the plans for design review per the community design guidelines, as well as the Avenue Flag specific plan, that we will require that building 1 be placed at grade with the pedestrian sidewalk along Avenue Flags. Raising it above street level 3 feet is not conducive to pedestrian accessibility, nor potentially to businesses who really thrive on that visibility and accessibility from a street frontage. There will be some setback revisions that could potentially be required, and building facade and height articulations required per the form-based code in the Avenue Flag specific plan, as well as in those areas where the form-based code is silent. The community design guidelines would fill in any of the gaps that aren't covered in the specific plan. One of the other items that is not shown on the site plans is an interim treatment for the Phase 2 land area. It's just shown as a green space with no description of how they would treat that in the interim, and we don't know when they would be coming back to construct the Phase 2, and there needs to be a plan in place in order to have that site aesthetically pleasing in the interim and to maintain it. I covered the need for addressing parking for the cafe use, so we'll just keep going forward. And we need more information on the location of bicycle parking and the number of spaces they're proposing. Revised landscape plans will be required, as well as irrigation plans that were not submitted as part of the plan set. On the landscape plans, the proposed landscape areas is approximately 5% of the lot area, and this is inadequate, and a minimum of 15% is required for mixed-use developments that have an underlying base zone of CR, which is what this is. And as well as landscaping is needed also to address the aesthetics on this very prominent street corner. Okay, I mentioned that. Additional comments were submitted by our architect and as part of the design review process, and I've distributed those to the Planning Commission as well as to the applicant. And they are pretty detailed. I'll just kind of go over and highlight them in a few slides down the road, but for right now, we just need to make the applicant aware that they do need to address the comments in the design review. And okay. And as part of the irrigation plan, we need to make sure that a model water efficiency landscape ordinance statement is made on the plans. As far as the architectural design goes, again, to address all comments in the design review, and these include complying with the design style that is being adopted for the specific plan area. At the present time as it stands, the potential style, and it is a single style that the City Council has introduced for potential adoption, is the Art Deco style. And we will have either confirmation about this next week, or there could be some potential additional nuances to that, but we will not know that for certain until next week. And we will provide the applicant with the outcome of whatever design style is adopted, either next week or further direction as we move down the road with the specific plan. And again, as I mentioned, for those elements not covered in the specific plan, the community design guidelines would govern. A particular note, we're really encouraging the applicant to go back and re-review community design guidelines and the form-based code requirements, and pay particular attention to building heights, setbacks, massing, facade treatments, building materials, building articulation, and exterior elements such as the staircases. Color and materials board will be required, and we would appreciate receiving this with the revised set of plans that will be coming in, so that we can take a look at the materials being proposed. Right now it looks like the material being proposed for the storage warehouse building is not one that conforms with the design guidelines. Master sign program will be required, and the requirements for this are detailed in our municipal code. The elevations will need to be revised, again fully dimensioned on all sides of all proposed buildings. The renderings and perspectives will need to match the elevations, and the building will need to be at street grade. Detailed exterior lighting plans are required. We'll need to have better information on the location, fixture types, specifications, and make sure that all exterior lighting really is covered. And especially important, we will require a photometric lighting plan to determine how the lighting on the property relates to the adjacent properties. Public Works comments were also included in the staff report, and the applicant will need to submit a stormwater control plan, a drainage study, a flood study, a separate public improvement plan. You know, as I mentioned previously, the grading plan included the public improvement plans, and also it seemed like there were some missing sheets, as the grading plan referred to a sheet 5, which there was only one sheet submitted, so there were no other sheets that we could refer to. And utility plans will also be required. The grading plans will need to be revised to show the existing versus the proposed grading. And also, we would recommend that the applicant consider reducing the number of driveways from 3 to 2. When the concept plans were submitted, they were showing 2 driveways, and on these plans there are 3 driveways shown, and it really chops up the street frontage very much on 2nd Street. So this is something we'd like the applicant to take a look at. Design review comments, again, these were provided by the city architect as part of our design review process. There's 2 components, there's site design and building design. Under site design, the solar orientation seemed to be complete, but the items that were either incomplete or require corrections are the site planning, adjacencies, meaning how the property relates to the adjacent uses and buildings, massing, perimeter walls, landscape. And under building design, it appears that all the items are missing certain components and complete definition. And these are the design styles, the color schemes, the detailing. So these are all incomplete, and further detail needs to be provided. And I mentioned already that the Buellton design guidelines and the specific plan development code are what is going to govern the buildings and the site plan that will be going in on this site. This project is exempt from environmental review. It meets the criteria for exemption under CEQA as a Class 32 infill development project for the following reasons. The site is less than 5 acres. It is surrounded by urban uses. Generally, it is consistent with the general plan and the specific plan and the zoning regulations. And it would not result in significant impacts, and is also adequately served by public utilities as determined in the Avenue Flag Specific Plan Mitigated Negative Declaration. And the recommendation before the Planning Commission this evening is that the Commission provide direction and comments to the applicant as well as to staff on the proposed project plans. And that concludes my presentation. If the Planning Commission would like to ask questions, I'm happy to answer them. We'd like to invite the applicant up to present the project or make some comments on the project at the Commission's discussion.
Will do. Thank you, Irma, and thank you, staff. We definitely like to hear from the applicant, but before we do that, let's, I don't know if we have any initial questions or comments from the Commission? No? I'd like to say great job by staff in putting this together. It's really comprehensive. Looks like you guys really did a good job of putting it all together, and I think the architect also did an amazing job at really looking at it all. Just a quick question in regards to the communication around the Avenue of the Flag Specific Plan. I'm sure that you guys, when this started coming to you, you were communicating about the Avenue of the Flag Specific Plan, and they knew that it was this thing that was being developed and still kind of in process. Okay.
Correct. We had a meeting with the applicant's team, and at the time that the concept review was before the Planning Commission, that was also mentioned in our staff report. So it was very much part of our presentation and our discussions with the applicant.
Right. Okay. And you also referenced kind of some of the changing, with the design fixtures and the features as we've gone through this, and we've morphed it over the time and kind of developed one. But to your point, and I think you've highlighted that a couple times, is this is a critical location. I mean, this is like one of the most critical locations of the entire avenue, and really the whole plan hinges on some of these locations.
Correct.
Right around that area. So, for the builder and the developer standpoint, it puts a little bit more of an onus on yourselves to work through that and work with us on that. But the hope is if we do this right, it's going to really pay dividends and be successful in the future. So, okay, those are the only comments I really had to say. I don't know if the developer would like to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Larry Rodardi. I represent Cameron and Faye Amiri on this project. I just wanted to go over a couple points that you brought up to make sure that Ruben brings them up when he comes to speak. One in general was that the floor level of the proposed project be street level. That's impossible because of the flood zone. I say that because we have to be 2 feet above that floodplain. So if that's going to be a deal breaker, then everybody should save their time, because it's not going to happen.
I can quickly address that. They can do a letter of map revisions, such as the Buellton Apartments did, to take care of that particular issue. So that's how the apartments got that requirement. They didn't have to go higher.
Wonderful. What is that called, Mark?
Yes, letter of map letter of map revision, and to do the flood study to show that the elevations are what they are, sufficient to provide flood buffering, because there's a property behind you that was built at grade, and they took themselves out of the floodplain without adding that much more fill. So using that data, there's ways we can do that to discuss and work it with the county as well.
Thank you very much.
And that, we brought it up not because it was going to be the project, but because there were solutions, so we can work with you on that as part of the incomplete letter.
The other concern that I have for the owner is that the restaurant that you keep referring to, we don't necessarily want a restaurant there. it was a recommendation from city staff that maybe we should do a little patio there for a little coffee shop. Trust me, we can do away with that. You know, that's going to be an issue for the parking. And then referencing the elements that are missing from the plan, and that's because we're trying to submit as much possible to forward this project without still knowing that the general plan still has not been approved. So we really don't know what elements to put on this. At one time was talk Craftsman, so we did Craftsman. Now,
Right, and
the one question that I have is, if it's not, the general plan has not been approved yet, why can't we fall into the standard guidelines that we have now? Why would we have to wait? Our intentions originally were to try to be on this project complete by April, May. And it doesn't look like we're even going to get approvals until April, May.
okay, so I would just like to clarify that you are referring to the specific plan.
Yes.
Right, then, okay,
Yes.
and we realize that it's in the process right now,
Limbo.
and well, it's not in limbo. It's going through the process, and we had talked about that during our meetings, and had mentioned that at the previous meeting of the Planning Commission as well, that it's likely that by the time your application is deemed complete, that the specific plan will be approved.
Okay.
And it's coming back before City Council for second reading next Thursday. If that second reading goes through, that specific plan is approved.
Okay, great.
And we will include that in the incomplete letter that you will be receiving the following day.
Okay. Wonderful. All right, then, thank you very much. I just want the city to know that we're willing to do whatever necessary to make, we know this is going to be a Bullton Point corner, and we want to be part of that. So at this time, I want to introduce our architect, Ruben Briola.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, members of the
Bring the microphone
Commission.
up a little bit.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, you're right. The perspective, color elevations, and the drawings don't match. And the reason is we did the perspective and color elevations ahead of time. Then the civil engineer comes and tells us we need to be 2 feet above the floodplain. And so we didn't have time to revise them. But ultimately, we will. And I'm glad to hear that this thing is going to be at street level and not 2 feet above the floodplain. That's going to make it more workable. We were, according to some comments from the civil engineer, I was even having to look at having some mechanical means to address the handicap issues, but with this suggestion, that's going to be great. It's going to work out better. Unfortunately, as far as the styles go, it's been a moving target for me, and I went ahead and did what I did, what the owner liked. For this meeting, I went and did a Craftsman style, which I just found out that this is not going to work. So you're going to adopt Art Deco. Not my favorite style, but it's if it's what you like. As far as the driveways, can I
You have to stay with the microphone, please.
excuse
me.
This driveway.
You
gotta
can
take the mic
take the mic out
and
from
record
its cradle and
There you go. I want to talk about this driveway. Ultimately, when the apartments are built, we intend to put a landscape island right here, and put parallel parking for the apartments on this side. And it's going to break up the residential from the commercial. At that point, we will need the 3 driveways. So that's the reason we introduced it. Yes, it would have been nice for this phase to just have 2, I agree, but that's the reason why we went that way. To introduce more landscaping, I guess I'm going to have to lose square footage or do something, I guess. So we'll go into that. It was my understanding that a metal building was going to be okay to do back there, but now it is not.
I don't think ever we said metal building was going to be okay with the avenue specific plan. But as far as landscaping, the patio area, I believe, can count towards your percentage. So the public patio area can be part of the landscape requirements per the plan, I believe.
Okay. That area in front, it is a nice area to put a cafe or something like that. But if it means, as you know, parking-wise, we're just to the limit right there, and for the apartments, we're going to have to come up with a negotiation on buying parking spaces or doing something. So that is going to be one of the items on phase 2 that we're going to have to negotiate. And at that point, we're going to give up some of this parking for the apartments, but then the negotiation is going to have to be for the 2 projects.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's part of for the specific plan of development opportunity reserve. They will be able to, if they put in some off-site parking, they can add parking reductions on the site, and then they could accommodate their phase 2 at some point.
Yeah.
But that would be part of phase 2, right?
Phase 2. Right now, there's no development opportunity reserve. Everything is on site. But they put in a restaurant. They do need a few extra spaces. They could put it in the area where the phase 2 is going to accommodate it, or work with the development opportunity reserve. So all we were pointing out is we do want the restaurant or cafe, but we would have to look at the parking. So that, just wanted everybody to be aware of that. That was the only reason for that.
It's a small area. It's about 1,000 square feet, so it's not going to be too many parking spaces. Maybe a couple. Who knows? I guess that's about all I have to say. If you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions? I'm good right now.
I just being an old maintenance person myself, how are you going to get to the roof to service those units?
Well, we have a second floor access probably right here. This stairway goes to the second floor offices, and this is like a little bed area, so we can put a ladder up from the second floor to the roof.
Okay.
That reminds me, this elevation here is going to be nothing but a blank wall. It has to be a firewall because of the adjacency to the property line.
Well, per the specific plan, it can't be a blank wall. It can be the firewall, but there's going to have to be some articulation, some type of design on it to comply with our specific plan and in our design guidelines as well.
And also there's going to be some setback requirements that need to come into play because that's right on the property line, and because of the building height, the way that it's proposed, there will need to be some setbacks at that location.
On that property line? Okay, I thought I read that we could go right up to the property line.
You can, and under the form-based code, you can build up to a building of 10 feet high, right on the property line, or within the first 10 feet of a setback area, and then the second floor needs to be set back from that location.
Okay. Now that you brought that up, the building, I can keep it under 30 feet. Am I still gonna need to push the second floor?
If it's 30 feet, and that's the maximum, that would be okay.
So I can keep my 8-foot setback in the front?
Well, it all depends on how the buildings will come back in and take into consideration the architectural review comments as well.
Okay.
So,
well, we can go over that. The reason it went so high was due to the floodplain requirements.
So there's some potential to look at there.
Yes. Thank you.
Before you go, I got a couple of quick comments. Regarding the 2 feet, the floodplain, I think the architect had a couple of recommendations too. They get a copy of this, correct? The architect's feedback?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so that'll be great for that. In regards to the driveway, my concern with that is if you get someone who's going in on the first driveway, they can't find a parking spot, they come around the back end, they go back out, they can't find one in the second lane, they've got to go out onto the street and then back into the third to go find a parking spot. So I kind of agree with some of the comments in regards to the 3 different entrances, because you could have a lot of circulation going in and out. If this is a busy street, knowing cars are going for the apartment buildings in the back, and you've got some businesses, some wineries, and some other things already existing back there, going to be a lot of moving around, possibly a lot of people migrating in the area as well, so a lot of pedestrian, just a watch out there, just to kind of keep in mind and keep in consideration. The other thing is the loading and unloading. Do you think that's going to be, and I don't know how big trucks can be that would potentially service these retail locations, but I love the fact that you guys have that unloading and unloading on property or in the parking lot. I think that's fantastic. Is that going to be enough room to allow for a truck to be able to load and unload?
It's what size you guys require.
Is that the size you require?
And it's just a striped area, so they can pull in.
Okay.
They should
typically that happens before businesses open, so I mean, probably not a huge deal,
But one of the comments that was in the design review was to take a look at the overall circulation and how well it functions, and also the separation between the trash enclosure, and there's one parking space that's very close there, and landscape screening requirements for the trash enclosure. And again, this is one parking space being shown right here. So part of the comments in the incomplete letter will be that Marburg, our trash collection company, would need to be okay with whatever's being designed there for accessibility.
And once again, that's only temporary. When we do the apartments, that's all landscaping, that parking space goes away.
But the comment about the trash collection enclosure and needing to comply with the standards would still need to be reviewed.
yeah. And we've had a couple projects come in front of us, and they've had a phase 1, phase 2, and I'm sure you guys will fulfill your overall goal. But these things change sometimes, and so as we all know, you just can't really depend on what's going on with phase 2. And I think, Mark, you already mentioned this, and Irma, you mentioned it too. We're focused on phase 1, and that's kind of, I think, where the commission's going to focus as well today. So take that into consideration. But I mean, I do like the fact that the loading and unloading area is within the parking area, so that's good. And then the last comment I was going to just quickly make is the cafe area with the courtyard. I think the courtyard is built within the specific plan itself, so that would still need to be, if it's a cafe, I think that's a great idea as well. But of course, and Andrea, I think, is going to talk about that a little later today, as we have some experience with food service joints in the city and the parking restrictions we've had, and so we are, that's another moving target, unfortunately. So apologies, I know you guys are trying to to work with it. And sorry that you had to build a craftsman style architectural design there, and then you can't even use it. I'm sure it's
Nicer than Art Deco.
But in defense of Art Deco, we did see. I think we were all apprehensive at first about the Art Deco. Some examples that came in front of us when we really looked at the plan. It kind of got me thinking. There's some really good opportunities. You've got some modern take on Art Deco, and there's some really good stuff out there. So maybe
I've been to Miami too many times.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So do we open it up for public?
You can open up for public comments. Not official public comment period, but the public can come up and speak.
Is there any public comments? No. Okay, great. Any final comments from the commission?
I would echo, I think, the main points which were brought up, and what obviously, like you said, it's a moving target on the architectural style. So I'm sure the next time you come back, you'll wow us. The landscape certainly needs to be enhanced. The trash area, I agree with one of the comments of the review architect. That'd be nice if there were one door that the employees could use, so they're not opening up those big swinging gates every time they need to throw out a bag of trash. I don't know if that's possible. It just seems, because I've seen those doors and they just open and close and open and close, and pretty soon it doesn't look very sightly. So those would be my comments, and hopefully next Thursday the style gets set so you guys can work on it.
Patty, you got any comments?
I agree with the staff comments, and thank you, staff, for the work on the project.
Okay, great. Marcelo, did you want to add anything?
I'm just listening from our first meeting, but I like how everything's coming together and how everybody seems to know their business.
Great. Yeah, again, just to reiterate, it's a site that's really critical for the success of this, and I think if we don't do our due diligence on this and really feel happy and comfortable with what the final result is, it could be a mistake. So I think ourselves and the commission are going to be a little uber sensitive, but it seems like there's great comments from staff, great comments from the architect, and also great comments from the developer and the associated architect. So I think there's a great synergy there, and it's just a matter of getting through it. So we look forward to seeing what you guys have to come up with in the future. And again, I agree with all the recommendations as written, and we're good to go. So.
And if I may chip in, what I would suggest is let the council adopt the plan next week on Thursday, and maybe set a meeting up with us, and we can go over the details and talk to you about it. And then before we expend any more time on the plans, make sure the council's got it adopted, and then we can sit down and help guide you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move to our next subject, next business item. Parking Standards Research and Recommendations for Restaurant Uses by Andrea. Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just switch.
Get the hot seat on.
Okay, good evening, Chair Dunstan, Commissioners. This is a follow-up to the June 1st meeting when we discussed, at that meeting, just also for Commissioner Sarkia's benefit, we, the background is sort of that we, staff and the Commission have sort of noticed in different projects around Buellton that there seems to be a lack of sufficient parking in some of the restaurant uses, particularly the more new, recent developments. So the Commission asked staff to look into updating parking standards for restaurant uses in Buellton. So last meeting we took a look at other communities around Buellton and what their current parking standards are, and just sort of looked at how that compares, how we compare to those cities. And so the purpose of this meeting is also kind of to discuss what the further research that I've done. It's not complete enough yet to, I think, make a decision at this point, but I wanted to bring back what I've found to possibly open it up for more discussion and maybe some recommendations for the Commission to focus on further research or to look at different options as we move forward. So I think I kind of covered this slide there. So before I get into my research and what I looked into, so our current parking standard, as you know, is the 1 per 300 square feet of area for patrons and then 1 per 2 employees in addition. So I know at the last meeting one of the questions or things to clarify would be, well, how do we calculate, if we're looking into updating the parking standards, how do we calculate what the number of spaces that would be required if we did update them? So I did a little bit of research, and of course this is, it's a catch-all standard, so it's not going to apply in every case exactly this way, of course, but what I did find was that a lot of restaurants that are looking, at the space of the restaurant, they operate under the general standard of 60% for area for patrons and 40% for kitchen and storage space. So that's what I used when I was calculating the, if we updated it to this standard, at least for the standards that apply for the what I call apples to apples comparison of our existing current standard. So that's the standard that I use. Of course, it varies a little bit. It will vary in the real world. So just that's something to keep in mind there. Also, I did find it difficult to determine the number of employees as we anticipated, just because there's so many different kinds of restaurants. Depending on the type of restaurant, the business model that particular restaurant has, that's sort of a moving target, something that is a little bit hard to predict. So in my calculations, at least at this venture, unless otherwise specified, the number of employee parking spaces was not included in the calculation. It would just be in addition to whatever the number is that's shown. So again, instead, I looked at looking at Buellton's baseline conditions for restaurant parking and compared it with increasing the parking standards to various hypothetical restaurant sizes, so you could kind of see the different kinds of restaurants. Using this 60-40 general standard to kind of look at what that would mean in terms of actual raw numbers of parking spaces with these different scenarios. So just to give you an overview of the different, standard or hypothetical restaurant sizes that I looked at, anywhere from 500 square feet to something that's a very large restaurant at 10,000 square feet. So from 500 square feet, and a very small coffee shop or donut shop possibly, all the way up to Black Bear Diner. This was my example for the 5,000 square foot example. I did take a look at some of the existing restaurants that we have in town and what their current square footages are. So just to give you sort of an idea of what the sizes of those restaurants are and how that would look in any additional restaurants that would come in and with potential updates to parking standards. So again, I looked at comparing baseline of 1 per 300 square feet of area for patrons and 1 per 2 employees, and I looked at increasing the first two here. I looked at comparing again apples to apples, so just taking the same variables that we have currently in our standard and just simply increasing that square footage requirement. Then the last three I looked at just looking at total square footage. I know that some other communities do that, and the Commission wanted to see something of that nature. I will note though that when you look at the total square footage of the unit, you would also that would not include employee parking as well. So that missing piece of not really being able to hone in on the employee parking aspect makes it a little bit difficult to compare when you're looking at comparing what we have now to if we were to update it to totals for area of the unit to that kind of a standard. So just something to think about. So these are the two spreadsheets. These are really just sort of the raw spreadsheets that I took into consideration here. So again, on the left-hand side, you have the hypothetical restaurant size. Looking at the top spreadsheet first here, if we just focus in on that one. This one would be the more apples to apples comparison, which is really I'm calling the preferred scenario, because if we want to be careful with how we are updating the standard, unless we have further information, which the Commission can certainly recommend that I, look into different scenarios and look a little bit deeper into this. But at this point, these are the preferred scenarios, whether it's updating it 1 per 250 or 1 per 200 with employee parking, just because it's a little more clear to compare to our existing current standard. So just to kind of go over how I did the calculation. So you have the existing restaurant size, then I took the 60-40 comparison, so I added whatever the square footage calculation came out to be, accounting for that 60% for area for patrons. Then that square footage was what was used to calculate the hypothetical required parking. So you can see there in white in the center, that would be baseline parking requirements for what our current code requires for those types of restaurant sizes. And then in the columns to the right of that would be the raw numbers of required parking, hypothetical required parking spaces if we were to update it to more strict square footage standards for the parking. So you can kind of see that, and again, the 60% is it's not a static number. It will probably change depending on the restaurant model and things like that. But you can see that it does go up slightly, and as you get to the larger restaurant sizes, of course, there's going to be more spaces required. But in either one of these scenarios, I think it would meet our goal of not putting too much of a burden on the developer or property owner to provide a lot more parking than what we currently have, but it will also just over time, the 1 or 2 spaces in these new restaurants that will be coming in could make a difference and provide more adequate parking for Buellton. Now the spreadsheet on the bottom, this is where I compared just the total square footage of the unit to our baseline. Now, again, it's very hard to compare because without knowing the employee, depending on where we go with, if you're considering the employee parking as part of the total square floor area, or if you would put in addition. But if you look at the spreadsheet, you can notice that even if we were to just update it from our current standard to 1 per 250 of total floor area, that would increase it to double the amount of or at least in this scenario, double the parking that would be required. So again, without, whether we would put an employee parking standard in addition to that or include it as part of it, it's a little bit hard to compare when it's not apples to apples, as I call it. But I did want to show how that, that would make a difference in the number of required parking spaces when you include total floor area. So again, 1 per 2, updating it for the apples to apples comparison of 1 per 250 or 1 per 200 would be staff's preferred scenario. And this spreadsheet here I just put together quickly just to kind of show, the percent area for patrons is going to vary. It's not going to be 60% all the time. So just kind of applying random percentages around that 60 to kind of show, and also restaurant sizes that would be probably more realistic than the intervals that I provided in the calculations. Just to show, it basically shows the same thing, but just to show that it maybe a little bit more realistic calculations and how it would increase in terms of raw numbers. So and again, so as our code is written, if let's say there's you do the calculation and there's 3.2 or 3.1 spaces required, that actually would translate into 4 spaces. It's the next highest whole number. So the square footage really does, it can change by 1 depending on what the exact square footage is of that unit. So again, just to reiterate here, I'm calling it scenario 1, preferred scenario 1. 1 per 2, if we increase the parking to 1 per 250 and 1 per 2 employees, staff feels that we could get a couple additional spaces potentially out of different developments, but without overburdening the property owner or developer that's developing the project. Again, we did touch on at the last meeting that there is a lot. We do allow restaurants in the industrial area, and a lot of the existing the parking layouts in those existing buildings is meant for industrial uses. So it could, updating the parking standard at all could further affect, the number of spaces. They would just be required to accommodate those extra spaces if they did want to convert to a restaurant. That would just be something to consider. Now, scenario 2 is same thing. Just a few more spaces would be added, and same potential impacts. But I think both would provide a benefit in reaching our goal of providing a little bit more parking spaces when it comes to restaurant uses in Buellton. So again, this is really just to discuss where I've come so far with my research. Obviously there's a little bit more research that may need to be done, at the Commission's discretion if they want to recommend any kind of, looking into any other kind of scenario. I know that some of the other communities have different ways of looking at parking, and I can certainly do some research on that end as well to see, if those types of parking standards would work for us. But at this point, we as staff thought that just comparing apples to apples at this point would provide some more clarity in terms of how that would affect, in the real world, how that would affect the number of parking spaces that would actually go in on the ground if we did update it in the apples to apples scenario. At this point, I'm open for recommendations, comments, and in further conducting my research to update the parking standards for restaurants.
Thank you, Andrea.
A couple questions. Mm-hmm. So right now it's not codified any place in the municipal code about the 60/40?
No, that was just really a restaurant industry standard that I found in my research. So that's what I used to sort of...
Yeah, you have to have a baseline.
Right.
So we rely on the developer or whoever is bringing that. Okay, how much of this is going to be front of house? How much is going to be back of house? Is that how we base our calculations? We go, Mr. Habit?
Yes, we get floor plans from them, and they would show the cooking areas and the bathrooms and in the public area.
Yes. Okay. And then over at the village, I guess, wherever Tractor Supply is, are they just right on the money for number of parking spaces required for that whole complex?
I would have to look back at the numbers, but I believe that it was developed as with the required number of parking spaces.
Yes, they met the basic requirements.
Okay, so they're pretty much right on the number.
That's correct.
And
we've had to restripe some small spaces because they did make some mistakes out there, but as far as the total number, they are what was approved.
And so the 250, one for 250 would have increased, I think, the habit, if you say it's 2,000 square feet, would have increased it by 1. I'm not sure that would be too much relief. It would mean 3 if there's all those 3 restaurants are 2,000 square feet, so we get 3 more parking spaces.
Right.
So, I don't know. I like the 250, but I don't think that'd be too much of a burden on people. And how much of this would have affected the Commons? I mean, Commons is huge.
Right.
Commons might be up here gaining, they're sort of squeezed in. But, they're already approved, I recognize that. But.
Okay, but a similar project that would come in of that size then would have additional parking requirements that some of the other projects that were approved prior would not have, such as the Commons.
That's my comments, questions.
Thank you, Deb. Patty?
I have a couple questions. For clarification, even though it's really not in attachment 3, I think, the number of employees determined, that's the type of restaurant? Is that how that's...
Well, in my research, without quantifying it, different types of restaurants, sit down, fine dining, takeout, they require different, they have different business models and ways of, providing the service, so that would require different numbers of employees naturally.
So it would be the type of the restaurant?
Yeah, probably the type and, of course, the size and different variables.
And we usually would ask for the number of employees as part of a project, so that can be calculated. But again, it's a moving target because they could add more in the future, add less, and we don't usually check on that. So the employee part is kind of a hard concept or a hard number to keep quantified as far as parking calculations.
Yeah, we'll always get the low number. To be honest, we're going to get the low number. So.
And then when it changes businesses, correct. Okay.
Right.
And then my other question is, because I wasn't involved in this first meeting, and I think this will be very important when we go through the Avenue of Flags, the specific plan, and as projects come in. But where would a winery tasting room fall into this? Is that classified as a restaurant, or is that like general retail? Or?
I believe so. We don't currently have in our zoning code, our municipal code, we don't have a standard for wine tasting. However, I think that it was included in the specific plan area, and I believe it was calculated as restaurant. Yes.
Right,
So it
but,
would
but basically, retail and restaurant in our code right now are the same. So it's 1 per 300 for a retail, 1 for 300 for a restaurant. But you add the employees to the restaurant, but not to the retail.
Okay.
So that's something we would have to look at as well if you want to designate, and we can define a wine tasting room as a restaurant to get the parking more in line with restaurant type of uses. So if we do a code amendment, that could be included as well.
I would like to see that, because I think there's a lot of potential for that along the avenue
Yeah,
and the
good-
new
good
specific
point.
plans.
One caveat to that, though, is you can put a lot of tasters in a very small area. You can the 40-60 rule kind of gets thrown out at that point, I would think, because you got the the minutia of it. But
Yeah.
but I think I agree, though. I agree. Marcelo, did you want to ask?
Yeah, I know this is looking forward, but what about Ellen's and Mother Hubbard? How do they fall within these charts of restaurant size and the number of patients parking?
I would say that's probably in the Black Bear Diner category, probably 3,000 to 5,000. And just let you know, existing restaurants would not have to comply with anything new, but that the Ellen's and Mother Hubbard's would be somewhere in that range, and maybe Mother Hubbard's a little less because it's in a kind of more of a storefront. But they're typically like the Black Bear Diner, the breakfast, lunch type of facilities.
Yeah, not that they would require by law these number of parking, but their need for a number of parking for their patrons is where I'm getting at.
Yeah. Interesting note on that is well, I'm getting aside. My mind just started going in a different direction. But it's funny because when you put the chart up around Subway, for example, that was 500 square foot.
Let's see.
Or, I'm sorry, yeah, 500, I believe, is what you
approximately. So I looked at the square footages, and it might have been 1,100 something, but I just tried to fit it into something close.
Because they get quite a bit of, I mean, I've been there a few times, they get a lot of traffic.
Yes.
You know, obviously most people come in, they don't sit down, they grab and they go.
Yeah, usually with the smaller ones, it's that the turnover's quicker, and that's why when it's small, you don't have as much parking requirement because they're coming and going at it quicker. Whereas the 5,000 and 10,000 square foot restaurants, I mean, the 10,000 square foot restaurants, you can have people there 2 or 3 hours having a nice long meal with some appetizers, wine, dinner, breakfast, dessert, and then after dinner, whatever.
We're at the Black Bear Diner.
That's the 5,000.
I know, but where is it?
There's one in Santa Maria, and there's one proposed in Buellton.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Good to know.
There's still planning to come over where the psychic area is. That's been one location that they've talked about as part of that development.
The psychic area.
You know, and to add on to Marcelo, what the point I was going to ask around that was, so I know you said for developments that are already approved, they would not have to fall under the parking restriction. What if they have a second phase, and that second phase comes into play? How does that...
If their second phase was approved as part of their first phase, they're done. They're vested with the code in effect the time they were approved.
Okay.
So even if the second phase had to come back for discretionary review, such as, let's say they build something in front, but they don't want to do anything back until later, and they come back with a development plan later,
Sure.
the second one would be subject to the new codes, whereas the front one would be subject to the first existing codes.
Got it. Okay, so if it's like a diner or something like that, part of the first phase, then it would. Okay. In your research, have you noticed anything around having available street parking or alternative parking or areas around? And I'm thinking about the industrial way section where those businesses benefit from having some street parking available versus the crossroads that has no benefit from that because obviously you're looking at two major roads and an intersection that's quite busy, so there's none of that available.
I haven't done research to that effect, but I mean, our parking standards, you couldn't count obviously the parking on the street as part of their required parking. It just, but it is something, to take into consideration when you're looking at, when we're looking at updating parking standards and seeing what's going on along Industrial Way with new restaurants popping up and things like that.
But again, if it's the code doesn't allow the street parking to be counted towards any type of required parking. If you do an off-site parking lot or the city puts in a lot, that's a different case. But the on-street parking is typically not used as any calculations. It's just there.
Yeah, it's just available. Okay.
Could you provide that in the next presentation? It's not in this packet. That hypothetical restaurant size is a good reference.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just for at the next meeting. Okay. No problem.
Yeah, we can go ahead and just send them the PowerPoint
Okay.
with that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be.
So yeah, similar to what Dan was saying, I would hate to overburden businesses and push away development, but at the same time, the current scenario needs to change, and it's tough because when you look at the 250 square foot calculation, it just doesn't make that much of a difference.
Right.
Andrew, do you think there's a lot more research to be done and to find out?
I think if we're looking at the apples to apples comparison and looking at deciding on one of these alternatives, I really think there's really not much more I could delve into in that regard because it's very fluid, depending on the restaurant, the type of restaurant, the size of the restaurant. So, I think this is, as accurate as we can get in terms of thinking hypothetically without knowing what types of sizes of restaurants will be coming in. So,
is the commission a little more interested in keeping the employees portion or going to just a strict square footage?
It's a great question. I don't know. Does anybody have an opinion on that?
I would think I'd like to keep the employee contingency or calculation in there, because let's just see what would it do on some of these guys. It might, I think that would be a real burden on some of them if you just did it on the total square footage of the building and not the 60-40 or whatever percentage that turns out to be.
I think that if you calculate, if you would prefer the total square footage, that would be something I could look into. Again, it would require more, what type of employee parking would be required, which is very fluid, but that would be the case, yes, if you added employee parking on top of the total square footage as well. So if you kept the employee parking requirement and then changed it to the total floor area, that would definitely increase the number of parking spaces. But if you included in some way the employee parking into that calculation, it would be that's what is hard to determine at this point, was how much would that actually increase the parking, and trying to quantify that. That's something that
I think you just need to look at the 10,000 square foot. When you just include all that, it goes from 20
right
and goes up to 40. That would be a burden.
Correct.
Yeah, that was it.
So,
I think even if you did include employee parking into that calculation, even so.
That'd be a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a consensus maybe from the commission that you want to go to 1 per 250 with the employees? Because if that's the consensus, we can actually put the ordinance together and start bringing that forward, or we can do additional research for you. So whatever the desires of the commission.
Yeah, I'm apprehensive with the employee part just because that's so subjective to what we get from the initial development plan, and it could be arbitrary. But at the same time, if you just did straight based on square footage, the impact is significant.
Yeah.
So it's that balance of trying to figure out exactly how we're going to make this work. And I don't want to, Andrea, I don't want to, have you do more research on something that really isn't going to have much benefit.
I could suggest another thing to research maybe that kind of combines them both.
Okay.
You do the 1 per 250 for the public area, and we do a 1 per 500 or something to that effect for the non-public areas, and we can see where those numbers and see where they fall within the continuum here of 40 versus 24. Maybe it comes out to 25 or something like
and
that.
And that some of the other cities, that's a lot of when I was looking at the other cities and what they've done, a lot of them have broken it up in that way where they look at square footage for the public area, and then some of them, for instance, in the spread attachment 4, I believe it is, several of the communities would do whatever their per public area per square footage is for public area, and then some of them would do, I saw 100 square 1 per 100 square feet of kitchen area or whatever that I think that's to capture the employee parking depending on size. So that's definitely something I could.
Why don't we do some research on that and bring you back those, and we can put a third table up there, then you can see the range. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah. Sure. Just a quick question. Define public area versus a non-public.
That's the public area where the eating occurs, where the public goes. The areas they don't go to, the storeroom, the kitchen, and things like that.
Got it. Yeah, I like that.
Great.
Let's take that direction. Okay. So, where are we with our agenda? I think that finishes the business of the day. Any written communications?
No, sir.
Planning Commissioner comments?
As a member of Rancho de Maria, I have gotten the last 2 notices from Figueroa Mountain announcing the events coming up for last weekend, and a couple, I think there's one this weekend or weekend after this. So at least that notice is getting out.
Good. And Andrea and Irma helped, and Claire, to get the lists to those facilities, as well as Flying Flags. So you are notified of all of that, and I have not heard any complaints since the end of August.
Last Sunday it was an event, and you could barely hear it.
Yeah, and that's the typical ones that would be occurring there.
It was very quiet. Even walking my dog, I could hardly hear it out in the field.
Interesting. Okay. Any other comments? No? All right. Planning Director report.
Well, the project on 246 is just about done. I think, do they have any other little things to work on, or are they done?
I think they're pretty much done. We just have some other minor things like headlights have to be reinstalled, and PG&E still has to actually connect the new pedestrian lights that we installed on 246 by the new sidewalk area.
Yeah, those lights look really good. I mean, they tie everything in. They're nice.
I've got a question around the striping.
Can we give you the Caltrans number?
Maybe. I don't know if this has come up in the previously, but as you go through certain intersections, it goes from that it can be offset by a good 4 feet, 5 feet, and then in that intersection, it kind of tells you go through there. It doesn't seem like someone was really paying attention when they were drawing stripes.
Well,
or a roadway.
It's offset like that because we're trying to accommodate the bike lanes on 246. So some areas have parking restrictions, so bike lanes need to be pushed out further. Some areas don't, so they can be further against the curb, similar to the original shoulders that were striped over there. So that's the reason for the jog. So we had to shrink medians and so on in order to accommodate those lane changes. So we knew there's the transitions, because the area is still relatively short. seems more abrupt, so that's why we had requested that they add guide stripes so that you can still kind of follow where you're supposed to be with those transitions. But that is the best scenario at this point.
That's what we got.
That's what we have.
That's where we are. Okay.
And as I did mention, the Avenue Flag specific plan had the introduction and first reading, and I think I sent you an email that the architecture was dropped to one style, not two styles as recommended by the commission, but all the other commission recommendations were incorporated, and the second reading is scheduled for next Thursday, and that would then finish the plan. And Andrea, anything else on projects?
All I have really is that we're working toward a December 7th public hearing for the network project. I have a few outstanding items I'm waiting on and working on, but we're working toward that date. So you can likely anticipate that project will be coming your way sometime in December. So.
In an upcoming meeting, bringing 480 Central Avenue to the commission. I have the economics done, but now we'll talk about the various land uses the council wants to look at, the economics, and what the commission thinks might be good for that particular site, and then that'll be packaged up and brought to council at a future date. So.
Okay, great. I guess that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and adjourn at, 7:20? Yeah. Thank you very much. All right.